So my name is Shanti Das. I am the founder of the Silence the Shame movement, and I'm also the founder of the Hip Hop Professional Foundation, which is our 501c3, and we focus on three key impact areas: mental health, poverty, and youth empowerment. But mental health has been leading the way for the work that we're doing. My father actually took his own life when I was 7 months old, and it was extremely difficult for our family. My mom had to raise 3 young kids. And unfortunately, in the African American community, we, weren't taught to go to therapy or to seek counseling, and it really took a toll on my mental psyche growing up. Fast forward to my adult life, I had a really successful career in the entertainment industry, but when things got tough for me, I started, going through some normal anxiety and depression. I think we all have our good days and bad days, but those good days turned into more bad days for me, and I didn't really know how to channel my emotions, and I still really wasn't properly dealing with it. And so in 2014, my best friend took her own life, and I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. It really sent me into the deep end in a dark depression. 1 year later, I contemplated taking my own life. I came very, very close to taking pills. And I've had a wonderful career, but none of that matters. All of the unpacking of the trauma from my childhood, just reared its head as an adult. And so, by the grace of God, I'm here in front of you moderating. Happy to be here spreading the message about mental health. Thank you very much. No applause needed, but this really is my mission and my passion and my purpose now. And Silence the Shame was meant to peel back the layers of shame and stigma, particularly in communities of color. And so we produce panel discussions all across the country. We've done work with Jack and Jill of America. We've worked with the NFL Players Association, Mental Health America of Georgia, and we've put together a wonderful panel for you today. And I'd like to start to my left to have our panelists introduce themselves and tell a little bit about what they do, and then we're going to open with a short video from Sharon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. Thank you all for inviting me. I definitely want to thank John Lewis's office for reaching out to myself. I'm a trauma expert. I've been in the business for about 17 years, and I've been traveling around the world for the past 13 years, educating people about individual trauma, vicarious trauma, historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, and how trauma affects the person's over a lifespan. So you'll hear more from me after we show the film and the other panelists introduce themselves. Thank you and welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hankerson. I'm a psychiatrist at Columbia in New York City, and I wear 3 hats. I do see patients 2 days a week at the Charles Rangel Community Health Center in Harlem. I also conduct research. So my research is focused on reducing racial disparities in mental health treatment with a focus on depression and trauma. And I do a lot of work with churches and pastors to try to increase awareness and reduce stigma in our community. And the 3rd hat is that I'm a dad recently. I have a daughter who's now 3 months, so if during our time together I say things that don't make sense, I'm going to blame it on sleep deprivation, so just bear with me. But thank you.
Is it morning? Is it afternoon? Afternoon. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jewel Gooding. I am the Executive Director of Mental Health America of Georgia. I'm very glad to be here today. Mental Health America of Georgia is an education, outreach, and advocacy organization. We provide education throughout 159 counties in Georgia, increasing mental health literacy for Georgians to ensure they have increased access to care. We are also looking at the social determinants of health and ensuring that we are providing basic needs in the community, looking at vulnerable populations. So we look at military veterans and their families, as well as the older adult populations, children and their families, individuals who are being reintegrated back into community after being incarcerated. We also support integrated health care as well as affordable housing for individuals with mental health challenges. Another piece, just personal for me, I myself had suicidal ideations as a child. I am challenged with depression and anxiety, and I cope extremely well in working with communities and helping them to also recognize that they have open opportunities to be successful. So we work very hard to eliminate that stigma that is associated with mental illness and changing some of the markers as it relates to the myths that are out there. You talk about violence that is equated to mental illness. We are working to ensure that there is a greater understanding on that so that more people will have access to care. And then personally, I did practice as a clinician. And one of the reasons I stopped practicing as a clinician was because of secondary trauma, which is also referred to as compassion fatigue.
Correct.
So I also work a lot with new clinicians and providing mentoring and talking about the importance of supervision so that we have a trained and qualified workforce. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Ania Handley. I am a licensed psychologist by training, and I'm currently working at the NFL Players Association as the Director of Player Wellness. And so the NFL Players Association is the union to the NFL. And in that role, my primary responsibilities are providing support to players as they navigate the substances of abuse program, as well as providing resources, guidance, education around anything that's wellness related. So that could be mental health, that could be performance, sort of the whole scope. Before I took on this role, which I've been in for about 2.5 years, I worked as a clinician for about 20 years. So I've had a variety of experiences, both working with young people as well as adults, college students, through the whole age spectrum. So excited to be here and talk about this topic with a great group of folks.
And I'll just add one last thing about the Silence to Shame movement. The Silence to Shame movement, I kind of came up with the idea in 2015. So I like to say it was conceived in 2015 and birthed in 2017 because it took us a couple of years to pull it together. But I came up with this silly idea. I just did a graphic, and I call this May 5th Global Silence to Shame Day. And I said, I'm going to see how many of my friends will actually repost or post this on social media so we can start the conversation, particularly in the African American community. 90 million impressions later.
Wow.
I was like, okay, God, I see I'm making a career shift. No more entertainment industry for me. And so having worked with artists over the last 25 years, I reached back into my Rolodex. And so we had everyone from Candy Burris to Big Boy. This year we had Common. So many other athletes and artists talking about it. And we also have a podcast on iTunes, Google Play, and SoundCloud. So we really are doing a lot of work in the community, particularly for teens and for the millennial generation, teaching you how to understand the importance of self-care, of coping, and knowing that we all have mental health, but we may not have a mental illness, but that it has affected someone that you know in your family, in your community, at your job. And so, again, thank you for being here today. The title of the panel is Speaking Up and Speaking Out, Silencing the Shame of Emotional Health and Trauma. And I would also like to thank the Honorable John Lewis and his team for helping us to put this panel together. And now we have a short video that Sharon Wise put together, and we're so excited to be able to watch it. As she mentioned, she is a trauma expert for the past 13 years, and there's so much trauma. You can talk about trauma from slavery to present day to what's going on. We'll get into all of that, but I'm honored to have her film open up our discussion. Please enjoy. Thank you, Sharon.
You're welcome.
For sharing your story and your soul with us. Very moving film.
I don't know why I always cry in the same place.
That's okay. I'm about to cry. It's all right. What do we call ourselves? The wounded healers, and you have a term for it? Surviving spirits. There's no time limit on healing, guys. You got to allow yourself to grieve or to heal or to go through it, and you might get therapy and help, and you have to take medication, but you still might have those days, and it could be an image or something in a film. Or I'll tell you, every time I'm watching a movie or something on television, I see someone shoot themselves in the head. Although I was 7 months old, I automatically think, oh, is that how my dad looked? Is that how it happened? And I'm crying like a baby, randomly in front of a bunch of my friends or even strangers. So it's okay. You cry. That was beautiful, and we love you and support you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, so I would like to open up with our first question, and panelists, just feel free to jump in. You know, growing up, I heard family and people in my community say, therapy's for white people. We don't go to therapy. We don't tell our family business, and you don't tell anybody your secrets. Why is stigma around mental health and wellness and therapy still so prevalent in the African American community? Anyone, feel free to jump in.
Go ahead.
So for me, I grew up on the south side of Chicago.
Me too.
And in essence, you don't think about traumatic experiences because you don't know you're in a traumatic experience until you're out of it. You don't know how you have made it through so many years of survival. And things for me, although I am now based in Atlanta, Georgia, very different things that is very prevalent when you think about the experiences of trauma is your survival mode, your ability to trust others, your fear of being stigmatized as if something is wrong with you. There is never a positive thing when I tell people I'm from the south side of Chicago. You know, it's, oh, how did you deal with all of that violence? Well, that was my reality, so it is what it is. I didn't know that wasn't a normal for me until I now live in Tequila, Georgia. Yeah, no one knows where that is. And my kids can play outside on the street. They can walk to the park and not worry about drive-bys. I can literally not have to lock my door at every single corner every time I stop because of the fear of being carjacked. So it's really thinking about, from an African American perspective, you know, my family, my parents grew up in the South. So of course you had racism that you had to deal with. You had a certain image and perception that you had to maintain as an African American because we were already in war every single day trying to survive. And for me, my father, born in 1938, went through that exact same era. So for me growing up, that's the same generational method of thinking that he instilled in me, is that you don't show your feelings, you don't talk about what's going on. If you feel it, you move past it, you get over it, because you can't be seen as being weak. And as an African American woman, when I think about being in leadership, when I think about being striving for success, the number one thing that I have to deal with, for me, I'm an African American woman from the south side of Chicago with a mental illness. I'm already done. No one's going to hear what I have to say. They will question your competence. They will question your intelligence. They will question your ability to do anything. So how can I talk about my experiences? How can I talk about my challenges when I constantly know that being an African American woman, I am constantly scrutinized or criticized? So you have to hide it. You have to not let others know when you are feeling weak. Now, as I've learned across the years, is that mental illness is not a sign of weakness, but that's the conversation that you have. That's the conversation that is had amongst so many African American families, because we constantly have to show we're strong enough. We have to show that we are enough. We constantly have to see every day someone is dying just because of the color of their skin. So you have so many different factors when you're talking about trauma that it's almost impossible for you to even bring it up and to talk about it, because you're afraid of what the perception is, that internalized social stigma that you feel that if you know, then where will I ever go in life?
Anyone else?
Well, I would just say, as it relates to stigma, and it's something that you're using with using your platform and your the people who you know to kind of change the way we look at mental illness and trauma. And so for me, getting involved with the film industry was really a strategy. It was like, how can I reach the most people using the medium that a lot of people like? Like, a lot of people watch television or film or download YouTube videos and that kind of thing. So for me, stigma busting is going to be a conscious decision that each individual makes. And that means to tell the truth on what's going on with you. The more that we get out into the community, whether we're talking to friends or whether we're on an elevator or maybe on an airplane and we're talking about, oh, I'm going on a trip to, say, Atlanta, Georgia, and the person next to them is honest enough to say, you know what, I have a fear of flying. When I was a little girl, I was pushed off of a airplane and I never recovered from it. And it seems like there's something the matter with us when we could tell the truth about one thing, but we can't tell the truth on our crazy. And once I started to tell the truth on it, it stopped bothering me so much. It's called trauma resolution. It's called, let me tell someone I trust. Write that down. You know, the reason why I didn't want to go to my grandmother's funeral was because my grandfather was there and he used to touch me inappropriately. Until I told someone that and I said it and called it by its name, then stigma existed in my internal locus system, in my environment, in the interactions that I had with others. We have to free ourselves, people. I mean, John Lewis invited me and some of my panelists here, civil rights leaders saying, you know, free at last, but free from what when we look at it from a personal standpoint? Are you free to tell on the things that bother you so much it makes you cut yourself, Sharon? Okay, are you gonna now wear short sleeves because now everybody's gonna see your burn marks that you put on yourself? But let me tell you something, I'm a different kind of veteran. I have had my own wars. So my mustard gas wounds and my scars and all the things that I had to do to live under that bridge and take care of my children, they were all my tickets to freedom. Because now the National Enquirer can't come and tell on Sharon Wise. I told on myself.
Y'all
and
can
get
clap
the story
right.
That's
Amen.
right, Mama.
Oh my God, I love that. And I think, you know, part of me telling on myself and silencing my own shame, it was difficult for me coming from the entertainment industry. I was so embarrassed about what my friends would say and think of me. A family friend here, Lonnie Johnson, who's a former CBCF board member, for me to even be sitting here talking in front of you, I'm hoping I don't get emotional because you've known me since I was a young girl. But the fact that I came out and told somebody I wanted to kill myself and that I didn't want to be here, I was devastated to see what my friends would say about it, how they would react. Even my own family member. I did a panel and hosted an event with the NFL Players Association. My brother, and this is just in May, I'm 47 years old. I had never told my brother that I contemplated suicide. Through it all, and that's a whole nother set of issues. I love my brother, but he has his own pain and trauma that he's never really dealt with properly, so I didn't want to put that on him. But it felt like a burden or a brick house being lifted, that weight off of my shoulder when I just finally got it out there. And I'm not saying you gotta like spread all your business on social media and tell every family member, but you gotta talk to somebody. And you have to be okay with not being okay.
Yes.
And being able to share.
Yes.
Because otherwise, the trauma that you can experience from it can eat you alive on the inside, and that's how you start going into a downward spiral and having that suicidal ideation. So everybody in this room, no matter what your nationality is or color, but particularly my black sisters and brothers, let go of the ego, stop trying to keep up with the Joneses, and take care of yourself. Don't worry about what everybody else is saying.
It's true.
It really doesn't matter at the end of the day.
It don't.
Because there is no mental health without physical health and vice versa. Don't let anybody tell you that emotional health and wellness does not matter. They'll be lying to you. Anybody else?
So in terms of addressing this question, I'd love to hear from you all as it relates to stigma in the black community. When you hear the word mental illness or trauma or depression or psychiatrist or suicide, what comes to mind? Yeah.
Just yell it out.
Yeah, just yell it out. Caucasians, so it's a race thing, yeah? You said what?
No, I wanted to share something, but I didn't know. Go ahead.
Good. Yeah, I was going to run it down to her, yeah. Here you go, my darling.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So my dad never took me to therapy. I was sodomized at 5 years old. I'm sorry. I was sodomized at 5 years old. I'm from Washington, D.C., single father. And his thing was, oh, black people, we don't see psychologists, we don't do that. So he wanted to keep my sodomy a secret. So he raised me in church. So I was raised a church girl with these demons and these inner tormenting thoughts of not killing me, but killing other people. You know, my demons would say, hey, you didn't cause pain to yourself. Other people have. so hurt them, you know? So mine was different, but it took me to almost really assault or murder my boss on a federal government job to realize I had a mental illness. He was attacking, he was retaliating, he was just doing evil, mean things, a black man, black on black crime, you know? And I contemplated killing him at his desk, quick. I already had it planned out how it was gonna happen. But God reminded me of getting therapy, going to Christian, Ephesians Christian Life Ministries. And at the time I was 25, I'm 39 now. So it helped me. I really understand the importance of getting psychological help, and I started a movement, Stop Stealing Our Souls, putting an end to sex exploitation, because my cousin was raping my family members and nobody told, but I did.
Yeah.
So they told me, hey, Lakeisha, you stopped Uncle Michael from raping us when you went to jail, when he went to jail for raping you. So we're living in communities where we look cute, we dressed up, but we messed up.
Garbage can.
Yes. So I'm just here to tell you, I'm living proof of mental health. I have post-traumatic stress disorder. Had I not gone to therapy and known my triggers, I wouldn't know how to deal with people now. So when I see a trigger, I back up instead of being reactive, because a lot of women are in jail because they were mentally hurting. Nobody could identify it, and they kill someone or hurt someone, and now they're stereotyped.
And what you're saying, Lakeisha, is true. So what she's talking about is how, like, the neuroscience of trauma. And I don't do a lot of this. I'm sure Doc can probably speak on this. But when you think about the amygdala and the hippocampus and the cortex and what they are responsible for, once a person gets triggered, they go to fight, flight, or freeze. They're gonna do one of the three. And then it goes, and it happens very quickly, like in a nanosecond. And then it goes to like your memory, like, well, the last time somebody threatened me, it was my uncle getting ready to rape me. And then it goes to your cortex, which puts it in some type of context and say, yeah, it did happen that way. So what we do in therapy, or when we're being real honest and we're trying to resolve the trauma, is we go and we say, wait a minute, I got triggered, but wait, I'm gonna go to jail if I hit that man. You start to resolve the trauma, and then your thinking changes, because trauma shapes your belief system, it shapes your worldview, it erodes your personality. So you wonder why a boy who is rejected by a girl go up into school and kill her the next day. We're talking about sensory, we're talking about self-regulation. Did you know that self-regulation is taught? When a baby cries, what do you do to that baby? You rock it, because you're teaching that baby the world is in a bad place. And then when it gets two, what do you give a toddler? A pacifier. I mean, in its very name, it tells you what it's gonna do, right? But what if that pacifier falls under the couch and there's nobody there to go get it, and the child needs to be pacified? 2-year-old got a fork off the table, sticks it in the outlet. Now the child got an electricity habit at 2, because it's trying to regulate itself. You know, so when we look at our community, we see that little dirty girl walking down the street, it will not hurt you to say good morning. Right. It will not hurt you, because I was that little dirty girl. You know, didn't bathe and had the same dress on every day, and you wonder why I was fighting every day. I was hungry, and I was dirty, and people stayed away from me. So when I grew up to start cutting myself, remember, symptoms are adaptations. So when you see gambling, you see drug abuse, you see cutting, you see all these adaptive behaviors, that's just people trying to take care of themselves. My cutting might be your golfing. My burning myself might be your working out. People are trying to bind the anxiety the best way they can. Anybody else?
I'm going to go to the next question.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
You said they said you did something with churches.
Yeah.
And that's my. It seems to me that's one of the big problems. In a black church, you can go in and say, "I got heart problems," and they say, "We're gonna pray for you." You go in and you say, "I got a mental problem," they back off, and that seems so taboo in black churches. So I'm interested in on what your work with churches has been like.
Brother, that's a perfect segue. Let me go to the podium real quick. So I thank you for that question. So I briefly just want to contextualize some of the work with churches that I've done and how I came to that work. So just to give some context of where trauma is and mental health problems are in general, we hear about health problems in the Black community, from obesity to diabetes to heart disease. But in the world, mental health problems are the #1 cause of disability. In fact, major depression is the #1 cause of disability in the world. So more people are missing time from work, they're suffering in silence from depression than any other health condition. And in particular, in our community, so African Americans and Mexican Americans have the lowest rates of mental health treatment and depression treatment in the US. And this crisis has filtered down to our children. You know, for the first time in this nation's history, Black boys between the ages of 5 and 11 have higher rates of suicide than white boys. So our children, impacted by trauma and by depression, are killing themselves. However, in our community, more people are more likely to go seek help when they're dealing with a mental health problem or stress from a pastor, from an imam, or from a clergy person than they are to come see a psychiatrist or psychologist or a social worker. So our churches and our faith leaders are really frontline mental health professionals. But to your point, there is a lot of stigma in our churches, and a lot of people in our community have experienced trauma at the hands of faith leaders. And so I think we need to be honest and open about that and be real about that and acknowledge that there is a lot of religious trauma that has impacted our community negatively, and we need to talk about it and address it and create communities that are healing. So the work that I'm doing in Harlem is actually working with a cohort of churches in Harlem and in Upper Manhattan to provide kind of church-based care. One church in particular opened a free mental health clinic that specializes in addressing folks who have experienced trauma, whether it was physical or sexual abuse, whether it was neglect, whether it was growing up in a household with a parent who was incarcerated, all of which are trauma, by the way. And so this is a picture of the ribbon cutting of this clinic called the Hope Center that's at a church in Harlem. And so I'd like to just take a little bit of time to show you just a very quick video clip of what this church explicitly is doing. So let me just pull up this video now. Oh, it closed, okay.
Oh, it's Florence.
And while Brother is pulling that up, what we're doing with the faith-based community here in DC, starting with the AME Church, Allen Chapel was our first church with all the pastors in Trauma 101.
Which is, yeah, so we're going to connect and we want to spread this like wildfire.
Oh, for sure.
Yes, okay.
Labeled as crazy, and then from the church's perspective, you always heard the whole notion of, well, there's some things you battle with, well, you can pray it away. If you pray and seek spiritual guidance, these things will go away. And I don't believe that. Individual counseling, group counseling, there'll be workshops and seminars. We look at them as innovators, not persons who have issues, not clients who are wrestling with some kind of disease, but innovators who are finding creative ways and creative paths to their own wellness. We no longer have to suffer in silence. We want to take that stigma off, in that we want to create paths of wholeness for people who battle in silence with mental illness.
Thank you. I'd also like to add, Lonnie, that Silence the Shame is working now with the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health, And we are implementing a program around faith leaders in mental health, where we're going to go into various cities throughout Georgia, 6 cities to be exact, and do these awareness workshops to actually train the leaders within the church on how to deal with the congregation when they're facing mental health challenges. So we're excited about that work. We also have an initiative called Silence the Shame Sunday, which is always the first Sunday in May. So it launched last year in 2017. I shared my story in the pulpit. I'm a member at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, America's Freedom Church. And I opened up and was very transparent, and as a result, Pastor Warnock shaped his entire sermon around shame and stigma. It went over so well that he did it for the rest of the month. As you know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So we did it again this year. We got 13 churches on board, and one of the churches had a national push. So we were featured in over 50 churches across the country. So we're looking to expand Silence the Shame Sunday as well. And I know, Inyaka, you wanted to add something.
So I think, just to piggyback on the conversation, when we talk about why is it still so taboo in particularly African American cultures, I think part of it is that there's a lack of education around it as well, right? And I think, Jewel, you may have said this in May in the forum. You know, we're quick to say, oh, I've got a great, hairdresser, or I've got a great this person that I'm willing to share with you, but no one says that about, oh, I've got a great therapist you might need to see. Right? So part of it is we don't know what treatment looks like. We don't know what therapy looks like. I work with primarily African American men, football players, and so the first conversation you have with them, they'll say, "There's no way in hell I'm going to see a therapist," because they don't know what therapy means. But it's the conversation we're having right now. And so until we get to the point where we are continuing to educate around what treatment looks like and what effective treatment looks like, we're going to continue to have that stigma. And the other piece, I think, is that we also have normalized the struggle, right? So it's almost like a badge. Things are hard, but I'm a survivor, so that's what we're supposed to do.
Hashtag no sleep. That's not healthy.
I'm proud of that. And so I think until we start changing that narrative, things can always be better. So things can always be better, and then how do we make sure that we are educating ourselves and each other around what help looks like?
And I just want to touch on a little bit, because we kind of just jumped into this trauma conversation, right? We talked about, and Shanti talked a little bit about it, but when we talk about mental health, I do want this term to resonate with you, is that, yes, everyone has mental health, just like everyone has physical health. It doesn't mean that everyone have mental illness. There are different levels as it relates to mental stress. It's not a point that all of a sudden you have gone through something and now you have a mental illness. It doesn't work just like that. There are, markers to it. There are distinctions that happens over a period of time, the frequency, the chronicity of it. That is that diagnosis piece. So the real conversation is looking at your mental health, the way that you think, feel, behave, and able to function in your day-to-day. Where there becomes a challenge is when some of that functionality is starting to be impacted. And that could be something as simple as having a baby, I don't know for any of those who aren't parents, but, having a whole person come out of you can be a bit of a traumatic situation. Being responsible for raising that just one little being all the time, no sleep, no organization or anything, getting a divorce, losing a parent, even changing schools. Before, when we talked about trauma, it was singular to war and violence, but that is not always the case. Trauma can mean something very different. And when we're talking about statistics and that time period between infancy 0 to 3, your brain is 90% developed by the time you are 3 years old. So if as an infant, you do not have ongoing connection, if you are not receiving nurture and the natural environment that allows you to be safe and functioning and feeling that safety, a lot of times we think, oh, they're an infant, they don't know. But their body does, and their brain does, and it develops around it. So when we start talking about the amygdala, where it actually protects your brain from that trauma, and you're talking about whatever maladaptive treatment you may have received, whether that is neglect or physical abuse, and how that does shape your foundation as an individual. So maybe you're not affectionate, but then of course you also have genetics, which is undoubtable related to some of your physical illness. Oh, we have a whole family with high blood pressure and diabetes. Sometimes they also have a whole history of suicide ideation, depression, anxiety, but we're so afraid to say those words because then it becomes a label. And then all of a sudden we're saying, I don't want to be labeled with something.
How many times have you heard somebody say, oh, he's bipolar?
Or how
No.
many times do we use it as an adjective?
Right.
This weather is so bipolar. It's not an adjective. Just like I can't say, oh, honey, you are so diabetic, to call me sweet. We don't do that, right? We don't. Because we don't actually value our own mental health. We don't value that our brain, that thing that's in our head, that if it stops working, everything stops working, and how important it is and how we take care of our mental health. So it is constant that you focus just as strongly as you do on your physical health as you do your mental health. And even if you focus even stronger on your mental health, then most times it's going to support your physical health. So I just wanted to take that step back to just recognize and understand that everyone in here has that mental health. And it is up to you, and it's not to say that every time something's going wrong, you're automatically depressed. You know, it doesn't, it's not that simple. But there are levels to it, and the most important thing is educating yourself on that and figuring out how can you best take care of yourself.
You want to share any sites that people can read or refer to? Just to get some of the basic symptoms around emotional health and wellness.
Yes. Google it. I'm going to tell you that. And I tell
Right,
my
and then,
kids
but you
that
can
all the
also
time.
go to the National Center for Trauma-Informed Care. You can go to SAMHSA's website, keyword anything.
NAMI.
Yeah, NAMI's website. There's a lot of information out there, and then you may actually have, you know, so there's some other sites. I mean, you ACE is Too High, Dr. Felitti, Vince Felitti, Bruce Perry's work, Dr. Daniel Pink's work. I mean, there's just volumes and volumes that speak directly to what Sister is talking about. And she made a very valid point. There are different levels, but I want you all to remember something, if you don't remember nothing else that I said. When it comes to trauma, it's really not the incident, it's not the rape, it's not the neglect, it's your response to it. Because that's where resiliency comes in at. Two people could be viciously raped. One goes to work the next day, and it happened to them. They go on. The next person can't get out of bed for years. They become disabled. They're on SSDI now. They can't breathe. They got asthma. Remember, symptoms are adaptive. People adapt to the trauma or the incident, be it good, bad, or indifferent. Something's gonna happen physiologically. And if you, and finally, I'll just say, if you Google Dr. DeBellis, D-E-Bellis, he has a lot of imageries, and that's why you're now hearing so much about trauma since 1999, because we were able to show that when a child or anyone has trauma, it affects your Broca's area. And what is the Broca's area responsible for? Language, shaping your thoughts. And they also showed that something physiological happens to your brain. A child at 11 with trauma from birth, and there's research around in vitro trauma, where the baby is affected because the mother isn't loved. So if we want to go back, and I don't want to take y'all too far back, like to conception and salt in your tears and stuff, because there's a lot of science out about that. Learn all that you can, not to be a doctor or anything, so that you can find out what's going on with you, so you can serve others with that. What's going on.
I just wanted to say the actual website though. The National Institute of Mental Health, the Substance Abuse of Mental Health Services Administration.
SAMHSA, yeah.
These are your federal websites. The reason I track you to the National Institute of Mental Health, because one, it does give you very simplified language and understanding, and it basically takes you right to the health facts, but it's actually provided the research, they have done the trials to prove some of that information, and particularly when we're talking about brain mapping and understand how the different parts of your brain react to certain things, such as mental illness, such as trauma, and such as that early brain development. So the National Institute of Mental Health, like I said, it isn't over your head. It's very simple to understand. And you don't have to be a scientist to understand mental health. So that's just some websites.
Dr. Hankerson, did you want to add something?
Sure. And one thing that everyone in here could do is to take a mental health first aid course. Has anyone in here heard of mental health first aid? No, so not. Has anyone in here taken a CPR course? Okay, great. So if someone is concerned they're going to have a heart attack, then you do the ABCs. What do the ABCs stand for?
Oh my God. It's messed up.
Airway, breathing, circulation. So I'm going over here. This sister remember.
I know.
But right, so CPR equips people to help someone who we think may be having a heart attack or being in acute distress. Mental health first aid does the same thing, but for mental health and emotional problems. So it's an 8-hour course that's open to the public. It teaches people the signs and symptoms of depression, of anxiety disorders, including post-traumatic stress disorders. It goes over psychosis, and it goes over substance use. And so I think this is, to your point, or your question, sir, about what are we doing with the churches and what can churches do? This is one of the trainings that we're offering in churches that gives people the language and the tools to be able to identify when someone in their family or community may be going through a mental health problem, and also the skills of how to help them and connect them to a mental health professional, realizing that not everybody can be clinicians, but everybody can listen, everybody can support, and everybody can connect. So if you just Google mental health first aid, they offer courses all across the country. They're usually free.
Yeah.
So I would encourage everyone to sign up and
And they're
take that
local. They're
course.
right here on 14th and
Yeah.
K Street.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
where the national
The
organization is.
National Center, the National Council for Behavior Health.
Yep.
And I think Linda Rosenberg and Jeannie Campbell are the directors over there, but it's a free course, and everybody in the room probably should take it.
Yeah.
And what we'll do is I'll collect those sites again, and we'll post those on our Instagram tomorrow. So I'm going to move through a couple more questions so we can really get to Q&A. If you, okay. Do you mind if we just get through 2 more questions? Thank you so much. So I want to talk a little bit about the trauma that a lot of our kids are experiencing and adults from seeing friends or loved ones get shot right in front of them, or the trauma of young black men getting stopped by the police and how they feel every time they see blue lights. What type of long-term mental health effects can someone have from that? Is that PTSD? I know every case is different, but can we talk about what our people are experiencing in our neighborhoods right now from so much violence and police brutality?
I'm not going to talk a lot about it because I know we have a really busy, we have a very professional panel up here, but what that's called is vicarious trauma or secondary trauma, or we call it the witnesses in trauma. You know, from the witnesses, the people that see this over and over again. They see hood shrines. They don't even live in the neighborhood, but every day they ride past this little post where there's some teddy bears where maybe someone got killed at or something like that. And that vicarious trauma, when I'm training military veterans and people returning from the Army and things like that over at the VA around the country, and they all say the same thing. And I was talking to this gentleman, he had half a head and one of his arms had been blown off from a Humvee. And he said, you know, Ms. Wise, it really wasn't what happened to me. It was watching my friend be blown up. So when you think about secondary trauma and vicarious trauma, it renders you helpless. It renders you helpless. You seeing your mama being beat up and you too. You can't help her. You know, so that kind of affects you. And then you end up going out and reenacting some of the same things. Now you're being assaulted by a male and you think it's normal. So vicarious and secondary trauma is a real phenomenon. This isn't something you'll find on the milk box. We have to pay attention to it because our community is being affected by it. Finally, I'll say I do, one of the things that I do is I bury children murdered by their parents. So I work with the Bonita Jax case, some of you all might have heard about. And I worked with the Renee Bowman case, the 2 little girls that were found in the freezer. And what I find is that the people that heard the story, that helped us bury them, they were more affected and they weren't even there when this happened. It had happened a year or so earlier. But you got people now having different forms of anxiety and depression. Take care of yourself. And finally, watch what you put in your ears and watching all that news with all that horrificness and things like that happening, because that's not self-care if that's all you're watching.
So I have 3 boys, 14, 12, and 9. My 14-year-old have access to a smartphone. And in their classrooms, like for very instance, we've been in school since the first week in August. And since the first week of August, there have been 3 threats made on the school in regards to someone coming in to shoot it up. They were false, however, it's the threat of it. And the threat of children as they are going to school and the fact that they are no longer safe. Not to say that something in particular has happened to them, but when you think about the impact of trauma, particularly environmental trauma, for me, I grew up in it. Yes, I did see drive-bys. I saw blood on the streets. I saw drug sales. I saw just about everything you could think of. Again, it was my normal, so it was just normal, versus someone who may not. My children are such suburban kids. I love them to death, but they are just as suburban as they want to be. So they have no idea. And I go home every year to Chicago, and it's always, oh my God, Mom, it's the ghetto. I'm like, you'll be fine. But the thing is, like, I lived on a street where we didn't have police officers, pizza deliveries, anything of that nature, because every time something happened, they would be robbed, they will be killed, they will be carjacked, whichever the case may be. But imagine having that level of trauma just going outside my door versus today in 2018 when you can pick up the phone and hear about 10 different mass shootings that are happening in our schools. How do you think that is impacting our children? How are they formulating that now the one place that they thought was safe is no longer safe? A lot of our children who are in abusive homes or receive maladaptive treatment at homes, school used to be their refuge. But now you don't get that because now you're faced with police officers, locked
Metal
doors.
detectors
Now
going to
you're
school.
looking at teachers carrying handguns and trying to keep themselves safe, and threats among threats among threats. It changes the way we view our world. And as our children are developing, it changes their viewpoint. So they're afraid. They don't want to leave their house anymore. They want to stay inside because they don't know what's going to happen when they're out in the community. And it's about how we talk about it with our children. A lot of times parents aren't equipped with being able to cultivate conversations with their child in order to help them to understand it, in order to help them to process it, because at most times we don't know how to process it ourselves. It's very easy to say, well, that person was mentally ill, but is that really the only reason that occurred? Or was there something along the lines that we could have done differently? Can we talk about the way people respond to certain things? When someone has been bullied and experienced a trauma themselves, sometimes that lack of effective coping skills leads them to making very poor decisions, like purchasing a gun and going to shoot the ones that they hurt, because hurt people hurt people. And they want you to feel the pain that they felt. So it's very easy to blame the perpetrator, not understanding what have they gone through, what happened to them, and how are we developing our children in a way to help them to be strong, effective adults. And that's where we can all have a part when we talk about our mental health. Are we talking to our children? Are we educating them? Are we mentoring them? What happened to our village system? Now it's everybody, yon. Good luck.
And I was
Thank you. Go ahead.
So, but I think it's also not just the children too, right?
Absolutely.
And so when you think
Teachers.
about teachers, you think about adults.
Administrators,
I think about
yes.
young. I work with a lot of college athletes as well, and so when you are, overrepresented in the athletic department, but not on the rest of campus, and these are things that are happening in your community, and you come into your sports arena and you take out some of that frustration, and everyone's saying, what's wrong with you? Right? Because they don't understand that the things that are happening in larger society also impact who you are as a person. And so that's the same thing with the young men that play in the league. They have lives, they see these things, these are their peers. Maybe they grew up and had, and witnessed that as a kid, but then you're seeing these things that are happening in larger society. So I think it's the children, absolutely, but I think we need to be willing to have more conversations even as adults with each other about how these things are impacting us. Right? I think
Absolutely.
we've gotten to the point where we're almost desensitized to it.
Thank you. So I would actually like to pose this question to you, Inyaka. Can you talk about some of the mental stress and trauma that some athletes experience from being on the field and life after football? Because it can be tough. You know, not everyone can have a career on the field for 15 years, right? Some guys play in the league for 2 years and 3 years, and then what? And even some of the stress that, and I don't want to go into this situation, but we all know what's been going on with athletes and the controversy with kneeling, and that's got to be a certain level of stress, even if they're not talking about it. What do I do? I'm trying to stand up for something good and something just and right in our community, but the community at large is telling me not to do this. So tell me some of those things that you guys are doing to assist the players and combat some of those issues.
I think it's important to keep in mind that, you know, one, that these athletes grew up in these communities, right? They are part of our larger society, so they aren't protected from what happens outside. And then I think sport is a microcosm for the rest of what happens, you know, globally, or and certainly in the U.S. So when we talk about some of the things that our athletes are experiencing, you know, I worked with this population since they were adolescents, all the way through active players in professional athletes, and then post their professional careers. And one of the things that I like to say is that a lot of times by the time they come into the NFL, they've kind of scotch taped and bubblegummed themselves together, right? Because they come from communities or families where they may have experienced some of these traumas or multiple traumas. But, you know, you kind of push it down, and you keep pushing forward. And then, you know, while we like watching football, it's a business. You know, we say that the injury rate in the NFL is 100%, right? So you are going to work every single day at a job that is not guaranteed, knowing that you are expected to run full force into someone else, and you do it for as long as you can because you love it, because it changes the financial outcome of your family for generations. I mean, there are multiple reasons why you continue to do it. And then what we often see when players transition out is the collapse, right? So I don't know who I am anymore because this is how the world has seen me. This is how I have seen myself since I was 5 years old, right? Publicly, I tell people, in no other space are you publicly praised since you were 5 years old, and people walk around with their names, with your name on their backs, right? So think about it to that degree. And then when you are released or waived, you show up to work and there is a garbage can, a trash bag with your things, right? I mean, it is brutal. And so the conversations that we have is, so how do we make sure that when players are transitioning out, they have the support system that they need? They have a good sense of who they are. One of the things that we like to say is, how do you make sure that you get more out of football than football gets out of you, right? And so what we've started to do, we've always had great resources for former players. So whether former players are have financial difficulties, mental health issues, we've got Professional Athletes Foundation, which provides a lot of resources. We have what's called a trust, which is for any player who's done 2 years of eligibility, he can go and he can get education, he can go back to school. I mean, there's a whole host of resources that we provide. And so now that I've been in this space on the active player side, we're trying to figure out how do we provide them the resources on the front end to make sure that that transition out once they leave is a lot easier. Because in a lot of ways, this population is pretty isolated. But then they also, you know, they deal with the same things that African American men, or primarily African American men, deal with in this society as a whole. So it's complex.
Anybody else? Okay. So that kind of leads me into this next question, right, of learning how to deal with some of the stressors that you're going through. One of the things that we see right now, particularly in the hip-hop community and entertainment, period, is self-medicating, right? People using this unhealthy way to cope with their problems. Can you guys share some healthy coping mechanisms that can be used with dealing with mental health care and trauma? And I know for me, you know, self-care and healthy coping mechanisms save my life every single day. So it's great if you check the box that you're going to see your therapist, or if you check the box if you have to see a psychiatrist and be prescribed medication and be okay with that. But what else are you doing from a self-care perspective, or what else can you do to cope? Because even, a lot of you guys are here and you probably have, high-powered positions, whether it's in corporate America or you work in the political space, and that's stress in and of itself, being in that type of work environment. So what are you doing to cope at work when you get so stressed out? So I just want to kind of open up that dialogue.
When I'm training around the country, and a lot of times I'm training a lot of people at the same time, so my population of people who I train are from prosecutors to judges to anybody in the healthcare industry, homeless services and that kind of thing. I had the fortunate ability to the last place I was locked up at, I got locked up in Chicago because that's where I'm from too, but they made me serve my time up in Seattle, Washington. So by the time I got out of the jail, everybody was like, my nickname was Angel. So it was like, Angel, where you been? So, my flip of the lip, I've been on tour. Because I done been to like 4 different women penitentiaries, right? So I done been on tour, And I've had the fortunate ability that the last place I was locked up was up in King County. About 3 years ago, I got to go up there and train up there. And of course, I don't remember the guards and none of the people that, were there when I was there, but I got a chance to give them some strategies to use and, at work when they're having, stress and compassion fatigue and things like that. So the 2 main things I gave them was these Tic Tacs. The breath mints, Tic Tac? So we say TIC is trauma-informed care and TAC is trauma awareness care. So whenever you feel yourself getting a little overwhelmed, just go to one of your friends and ask for a Tic Tac. Or maybe they see you and you look like you need a 5-minute break. They may come to you and say, excuse me, do you need a Tic Tac? That way you didn't have to tell the backstory. I might walk in your office and just shake them. That means I need 10 minutes. Go take over my group or whatever, so I can just go in the bathroom and cry for 5 minutes. And I cry, pop my collar, and then I go back on the... So it's these little things that you can do to buy in. Maybe you all got purple bracelets or a red pen, and you might say something like, if you see somebody with a red pen, those are people that can help you. You can go in their office and tell them what you're going through. Come up with something that everybody can use. And finally, this is my favorite, was the damn room. It was a room that was a seclusion and restraint room. And if you don't know what seclusion and restraint is, that's a good thing. And what I did is I had them to I said, everybody bring something in tomorrow, your white elephants, like an old chair, pillows, and they fixed that room up with all of this stuff, right? I said, when you need 5 minutes, you say, excuse me, can I go in the damn room for about 5 minutes? And the person would say, yes, I'll take over your group. So what you would do is you would go in the damn room and you'd open the door and you jump up 3 times saying, damn. Damn, damn, damn. And then you pop your collar and you go on back in the courtroom or to wherever you were and take care of your business. But see, those type of strategies won't work unless everybody buys into them. Even the leadership, which is why it's so important that when you're talking about mental health and trauma, the leadership got to be on board, because y'all might need a candle to burn at 2 o'clock, but ain't no candles allowed in the building. You see what I'm saying? So it's little small things you can do, little steps you could take that you just got to try them out. I mean, you tried on them size 8s when you know you wear a 9, didn't you? So if you did that, you could try other little small things that massage you and ease you into this, so your system, meaning your internal locus system or your community system, can actually work.
Okay, can y'all give it up for Sharon? I'm like, we both said we're going to use the damn. I'm loving that.
Girl, I love the damn room. I go in there about 3 times a day.
Go ahead. I know you've been waiting.
Yes, and this young lady here too. Here.
Hold on, we'll give you the mic.
Yeah, we get to that mic. Do a little Oprah down here with my 4-inch heels on.
Yeah. Slow down.
I just wish I had Oprah's $84 million she made last year, but go ahead, baby. Here you go.
Thank you. I'd just like to say that a lot of time, and I have comments for everything you all have said. I'm a trained art therapist by training. I've been in the field for over 30 years. Art therapy is another form of therapy. Sometimes it gets to the issues a lot faster than the talk therapy. And sometimes it just helps a person to collect their thoughts and be able to say, okay, this is what's going on with me. Then you have the art to help them to better talk about it, to work with other therapists or the psychologists or whatever. There are other forms of therapy, music therapy, dance therapy. There is something for everyone, but there's also Afrocentric therapy, and that's what we need to work more towards. We need more diversity in the field of mental health. I agree with you that we all have some mental health something. It's whether we admit it or not. And the other thing is, I spent most of my life trying to reduce the stigma of mental health. And a lot of times in the churches, I mean, yes, it's nice to have the programs, and more churches need them. But churches, we take the kids to church and they learn about the Bible, they learn about Jesus, but if something goes wrong, look at that kid over, that person is crazy. That homeless person stinks. Where's our Christian values then? Okay, that's all I have to say. Art therapy, art therapy.
Thank you so much.
That's right.
Oh, yes, of course.
Go ahead, my dog, because you had your hand up for 17
She just need
years.
the other A in TAC. Was that an acronym?
Oh, it was trauma-informed care and trauma awareness care. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, my dog.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tess, and I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I just want to say thank you all for this panel. It speaks really relevant to me because I had a cousin that really went into the realm of Black mental health, Dr. Joseph White, and he passed recently, and this is just opening my eyes to all of this. But I just also want to point out, what you were asking, why is there still a stigma and everything? And I think it's like, part of it is what you were saying, the lack of Black psychologists available. So that kind of just leads me to wonder, can we connect with just anybody? You tell somebody to go get a therapist, can they just go grab any therapist? Or, you know, is there a level of relatability? Because I don't see a Black man getting healing from a white woman psychologist. She just can't relate on that level. Or can she? Is she trained to? Or will he feel comfortable? Could he really open up to somebody where we experience so much trauma and oppression from white men, white women in our everyday world? Can we sit down with them and be real? And if we don't have people of our own color to talk to, and we don't have churches, this is where my mind's going. I'm rambling now. And then also today, the prevalent theme of suicide in songs. And songs by encouraging suicide, not only drugs use, but suicide becoming a really prevalent theme. So that just kind of worries me. And I guess that was more of a comment as opposed to a question. But thank you.
Thank you for y'all.
So,
So I was going to say, so, I mean, Jewel, oh, go ahead.
no, you can go.
Go ahead.
Okay. Just a few things. Well, one, to answer the question, coping, right? What are some things that we can do for coping? And there are several different things. You know, we talked about art therapy. So my mantra is find your therapy. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be psychotherapy, psychoanalytic therapy, dance therapy. I can't draw with the lip, but I will color up some stuff in a heartbeat, and sometimes that helped me. But something that really, because I grew up maybe a mile away from the lake, growing up in Chicago, wind. Wind relaxes me. It calms me down. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. There's no wind. However, there's a car that I will drive, and I will drive with the windows down. And it provides such a therapeutic moment for me that's all I need sometimes, that it reduces my anger, it reduces my anxiety, it reduces my stress. And if you have never been to Atlanta, it's called traffic. So you sit in there a lot, music, listening to music, any type of music. I love God and trap music, so it's between a little bit of Ice Cube, or it might be a little Cardi B, but it's also Ty Tribbett, so, just finding your therapy. And unfortunately, because I did practice as a clinician, I'm not a big person on psychotherapy. I don't want to go and talk to a therapist because I also know that there are limitations to therapy. So finding a support circle, find your peers, find someone who's not going to just say, yeah, girl, it's all right, go ahead, go play in traffic. No, we don't want to find that circle, but you find that circle who is going to allow you to hear your own truth, who is going to encourage you to say, you know, I'm going to give you this day. And you can have your pity party, but tomorrow we're going to get up and we're going to handle business, because that's what we do. Because you provide that support to yourself. And then also just recognizing people are going to have different coping skills. It isn't always bad. And just being accepting of others, allowing people to be themselves is something that you can do strongly, and to be supportive to each other, because sometimes that's all it needs. We were born connected to another person. And you see how I keep bringing it back to birth, because that's where it all starts off. But I want you to understand, you are born connected to another person. They cut a umbilical cord to separate you from a person. So what gives us strength is social connectedness. Do not isolate yourself. Do not find a dark room and just sit there and mull in it and allow yourself to hurt and be in pain, because one thing is for certain, you are not alone. 1 out of 5 individuals, you count yourselves off, I guarantee you, someone has experienced a mental illness, a mental condition, or they just stressed out. So be socially connected. And then also being mindful of drugs and alcohol. You know, alcohol is a depressant. And sometimes it's like, oh, I just need a drink. Well, maybe sometimes we don't. Sometimes you might need to go and talk to someone. Maybe we need to do something else, and recognizing those unhealthy habits like eating. I'm guilty of it. I'm an emotional eater. Someone makes me mad. I think it's my right to go and get a milkshake. Not always the healthy choice. However, it makes me happy in that moment. Find your therapy. Don't box yourself in all of the different types of therapy, and always think about medication as an option. Medication is not a no-no. I know sometimes you're like, oh, I don't want that stuff in my body. Well, sometimes we need stuff in our bodies because we're lacking things. When we talk about our brain chemicals, if we're not building enough dopamine or serotonin, well, there's something missing, and we have to take something in order to replace that, so we're working at a functional level. Just like if your body is not able to build enough glucose or sugar, we have to take insulin in order to build that up. It's your brain, it's your heart, it's your liver. Take care of your body.
And I'll just add quickly, to your point of isolation, you know, that dark night in 2015 when I contemplated suicide, I had been spending so much time alone and by myself. Friends were calling, I wasn't answering their texts, I wasn't answering their calls. I didn't want to get out of bed. I physically just could not do anything. And I'm a social butterfly. I rep Atlanta with the A on my chest every single day and try to be at all the events and be everybody's little sister and do everything I can, but you know, it got the best of me. And the mind is the most beautiful thing. The brain is the largest organ in the body, but it can be dangerous if you allow yourself to go into that deep place. And by the grace of God, I got out of the house so I could just go drive around and be around people. But I was crying uncontrollably because I knew that if I stayed home, I had already counted all the pills in my medicine drawer. Because I knew I didn't want to shoot myself, but that taking pills would be the easiest way to ease my pain. And I didn't want to die. I just wanted the pain to stop. But I had to get out and be around other people. And it's so God had, I call him JC. Me and JC, we real cool. We he real funny sometimes. He put my friend in my pathway that night who lived on the other side of town. I'm like, girl, what are you doing over here? And I was trying to mask it, but she knew something was wrong. You could tell I had been crying for days, and I'm not even really a makeup girl, but my eyes were like down to my cheekbones. And it was really a difficult time for me. And so she encouraged me to call my sister, connectedness, get back connected to my family. And I called the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-TALK. They talked me off the ledge, and Dr. Raphael G. Warnock, my pastor that I mentioned, and this is actually a good thing about the churches, because there are some churches out there really willing. He said, I'll pray with you, but sister, I need you to get help. Call your doctor, text your doctor tonight, and go see that psychiatrist on Monday morning. I had to take some happy pills. I'm okay with it. I'm not embarrassed.
Yeah.
And it got me back to where I needed to be. And you talk about self-care. Self-care still saves my life every day. I got triggers. How many of y'all Beyonce fans? I went to the On the Run 2 show 2 weeks ago, and I used to work at the same label with Beyonce. I knew her when she was in the Dolls before Destiny's Child. I've known Jay-Z and I were friends. We all grew up in the business together. I was going to go work for Rock Nation. But my point is, I hadn't really been around them in a long time. I walked away from the music industry 8 years ago. It's been a lot of ups and downs, starting my own venture, now this foundation. I'm like, God, I don't want to be the poster child for mental health. What am I doing? My peers are still at the top of their game. So I ended up going to the Beyonce concert, had a good time, but the devil got in my head. It was like, you should still be doing this. Look at all your friends, they in VIP, you ain't in VIP. You know, it was a really tough night for me, and I found myself spiraling and it's just 2 weeks ago. And I'm still out here fighting the fight. But I'm still Shanti Das, a child of God, and I still got to take care of myself. So you talk about accountability partners. So get yourself a circle of trust or a squad, whatever you want to call it. Write down 3 to 5 people that can hold you accountable for making sure that you do that self-care regimen when you need to. With Silence of Shame, we're doing what's called Self-Care Saturdays now. So we offer cooking classes, Zumba. We just did a hip-hop yoga class. So find your happy to the point of what Jewel just said. I like to go walking, but I also start my morning off with gratitude. That's self-care for me. Before I pick up this little phone, which I used to sleep like this, but now I put it over there, I wake up and I thank my Lord and Savior for waking me up to even have the ability to think, to walk, to see, to eat, to sleep, to preach, to spread the message of mental health. I can't do none of this without him. And then I also have to honor my body, because our body is our temple. So I try to go to the gym now. It's been proven scientifically that when you exercise, you get those endorphins going. It makes you feel better. So whatever it is for you, find your happy place. I used to shop and bow to Gucci and Prada and Chanel. Guess what I do now? I actually like thrift stores. I go to Goodwill. So now I have this little, yes, hey. So now what I do, because I did have a marketing background, so I try to brand and put Silence of Shame on everything I do. So I'll go get a jacket, remix it, and flip it. And so now it's a thing that I show up every time I speak, I have on something cool, but that's therapy for me. If I feel myself down, I'll go to Joann's, to the fabric store. Who would have thought I would ever be going to Joann's? But it's what works for me. So figure out what works for you, find yourself in your own happy place, get some accountability partners, and take care of yourself.
I just want to thank you for that. Thank you for that. I just want a couple of points. First of all, Miss Sharon Wiles, we need to get you a reality show. You need your own show. That's number one. And I want to, as a physician, I do want to speak to the point about medications.
Yes.
And I think our distrust, deservedly so, with psychiatric medications. Okay? So we know that African Americans traditionally by psychiatrists have been over-medicated. So I think it's important for us to just acknowledge that. That's point number one. I think point number two is that we know that black men traditionally have been misdiagnosed as having schizophrenia, when in fact, these men should be diagnosed with depression with psychotic features or bipolar disorder. So I think that there is and we won't go into Tuskegee. My friend can certainly talk about Tuskegee and the other instances of racism that we face as a people as it relates to our health care. So I think it's important to acknowledge that distrust. At the same time, I do think that depending on a person's condition, depending on the severity of their symptoms, and depending on how long they have been impaired, medications are not only helpful, but are actually essential to be an important part of that treatment. So I saw some faces when people were talking about medication, so I definitely wanted to address this. When someone comes into my office, the first thing that I talk about with treatment is the support system. The second thing I talk about is their nutrition, because we know that what you eat and how much you're sleeping, how much you're exercising, all contributes to how you feel and how you function. So you have to get all of those things into play. And then, depending on the severity of a person's symptoms, depending on their preferences, then and only then do we have a conversation about medications, and depending on their diagnosis, okay? So I think it's important to recognize that all medications, whether you're treating diabetes, high blood pressure, or whatever it is, have side effects. All psychiatric medications have side effects, and it's important to discuss what side effects are possible if you are considering taking medications with your doctor, and work with him or her to work through those side effects, because there are different things that can be done to kind of work through those side effects. So I just wanted to touch on that. And the last point, to your point about providers and who is going to address kind of the health of black men, and could a white woman hear the perspectives of black men? You know, there's just a limited number of black mental health professionals. 3% of all psychiatrists are black. 3%. So by the numbers, there's just not enough of us to go around to see everyone who wants to get treatment. So what I think one of the things that we're trying to do is, instead of having people come to providers, we're trying to take the providers in the community where people already go. We already talked about some of the work with churches that we're doing. What we're doing now is also working with barbers, and going to be working with stylists. Because we know as brothers, when we go to that barber chair, we tell our barber who we dating.
psychiatrist in
We
the
tell
world.
them what we've been up to, what's going on at work, and then you feel better, right?
Barber and the bartender.
My barber has told me countless times how many brothers have sat in their chair and have told them that they've thought about ending their own life.
Yeah.
If we can empower barbers and other people in the community who are trusted with skills to be able to recognize when someone is going through something, to support them and then connect them to professional treatment, I think then we will begin to dispel some of the distrust that we have, as well as getting people care who need it. So
That's
what I wanted to
fantastic.
talk about.
Thank you. And Yaka just had one point, and then we're going to open it up for questions.
Could I just interject real quick? I apologize. Hi. My name is Michael Collins. I am Congressman Lewis's Chief of Staff. And so I just wanted to pause this moment. I apologize. I just got here to the convention center, but I just wanted to take a moment to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank the panelists for being here, Shanti for heading this up, for every single one of you being here and taking your time to present this very most important panel. Congressman Lewis, if he were here, would echo all of your sentiments and knows how important this issue really is to him and to our community. At this time in our lives, so much is going on, and we really can't figure it out, but we know that, you know, people need help. And he will tell you that every day as he travels the district and travels the country. So this, again, is the most important and timely topic for us. On a personal note, I, too, have been, previous to coming, Congressman Lewis, Chief of Staff for 20 years, but before coming here, I actually got my MSW in clinical psychology from Boston College, and actually was doing some counseling before I left Boston. So this is very near and dear to my heart as well, and understand the importance of it. So again, I applaud you for taking the time to put this together. I thank everybody for coming out and spending the time with us this afternoon. And so with that,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ashanti, there was this young lady right here. She had her hand up. She's been very patient for 4
No,
years.
we're actually absolutely getting ready to open up for Q&A. I just
Okay.
wanted Nyaka to make her last point.
Okay.
I think the only thing I was really going to add is that I think as we're talking about coping skills and healthy coping, I think that at the end of the day, what's most important is we have to be honest with ourselves, right? We have to figure out, okay, how am I feeling? What's going on? How does what I'm feeling compare to my best days of functioning, my worst days of functioning? Do I need to reach out? Do I need to bring people close to me? Even if you're talking about working with a therapist, does this feel like a good fit? Right? So I think at the end of the day, we all have to be aware of what our needs are, which means sometimes taking the time to kind of shut everything else out and really do that inner work. When we talk about that awareness, because that's the only way we're going to figure out what we need, what therapy works for us. I love that, the idea of the when, that works for me, right? For some people, it's going to the gym. For some people, it's swimming. I mean, it could be anything, but we have to be honest with ourselves in order to figure out what works for us.
And what I would say is know your sensory diet. In every other diet, you know that you're allergic to chocolate, or you know that you're allergic to something, right? Well, knowing your sensory diet will help you with self-regulation. Know why you don't like chocolate. Know why you don't like felt. Know what things you like to feel on your skin and different types of sweaters that you like to wear. Because a lot of people think that that's something, well, okay, I like it. What's the big deal? For me, being abused as a child, I didn't know why I didn't like hard butterscotch. Why it was when I got interviewed, my first job that I could have gotten, the guy was sucking on hard butterscotch, probably to help his breath or something, but it made me think about when my grandfather and my uncle used to touch me inappropriately. They always had this hard butterscotch in their mouth. So I got the job, but I was very abusive to my supervisor, you know. Didn't know why. Know what you like, know what sounds you like around you. I like to have felt, and sometimes I still sleep with my teddy bear. You know, in closing, I'll say that as a child, I didn't have toys. So when I got my first paycheck, you know what I did? I went and bought me a Barbie doll and a can with a Kung Fu grip. Because I was always wondering, why am I so angry at little girls that's being hugged on by the mother? Baby, you're so beautiful. My mother didn't touch me. So I would get mad at little girls who had dolls, whose mothers was touching them. And once I started to resolve that trauma, my therapist was like, look, Sharon, I think you really need to go ahead and get that red wagon. Because you're going to mess around and slap that little boy down the street, and it ain't even his fault. You know, because sometimes you have these feelings and you don't know where they come from. Keep a journal, two for $1 at the dollar store. Start writing down these things. I'm telling you, this is your life at stake. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you, absolutely. So we're ready to open up for Q&A. Where's the microphone? And then also just a bit of housekeeping. If you're hearing some good information and you feel so inclined to post on social media, please use the hashtag ACL18 as well as hashtag Silence the Shame. Thank you. First question.
Hi, my name is Lakeisha as well. Thank you guys so much. I've been watching you all day in your silver coat, and I'm like, I recognize her. I recognize you from TV. I recognize you from your past life, and I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate you speaking your truth. Currently, I have experienced trauma in my life. My sister was murdered in 2013, and the Brittany Clarity Foundation has started from that. She was trafficked, she was abused and exploited. So I've got a lot of trauma around me, and now this has become my life's work. My degree's been criminal justice since then, but I worked in the financial industry for 10 years plus. So I've created Fly. I have a business, and I am trying to kind of get advice from you guys who are in the industry of trauma, counseling. I am doing counseling. I'm doing work that has to do with people's lives, that has to do with financial, because a lot of it is hand in hand with a lot of other stuff that happens. So I just kind of am wondering, kind of on it's a professional development question, where do you guys see this fitting in the world of mental illness, mental health, all those things as far as the financial piece? Because I'm really trying to find a niche into this world, and everything's like, okay, but you're not Health East, you're not a clinic, you're not a doctor. So I'm really trying to figure that out in a creative way.
So I'm a mental health advocate, which means I find mental health in every intersection, industry, a part of your life. Financial literacy is extremely important, and particularly for someone as if they're a part of a vulnerable population, low resources, that is extremely important. There is an initiative in Georgia where they are working with communities to teach them financial literacy in order to increase their stability. And when we talk about instability, particularly just physical stability, housing, employment, maintaining an account, a lot of times when we have individuals who might have been homeless, incarcerated, coming back from the war, or just being in any type of armed forces, some of the things, and even our youth today, like my child has no idea what it means to balance a checkbook, because one, we don't use checks anymore, right? But also just understanding those simple practices. So it starts with life skills, and particularly with someone who has a severe and persistent mental illness. So maybe they have a diagnosis of schizophrenia, bipolar with psychotic features. That changes your life. It doesn't mean that you can't live a successful life, but it does mean that your life is going to look different. And you have to learn those skills in order to maintain your stability. So it's always an opportunity to teach someone financial literacy. One thing we always say is, we can get you a job, but if you don't teach them how to maintain that job, ensuring that it's not okay for you to curse out your supervisor because they made you mad, or because that customer had an attitude, you kind of can't have an attitude back because you're probably going to get fired, and understanding those types of consequences. And then when you get your first paycheck, it's probably not a real good idea to go and spend it on a bunch of junk food when that money has to last you a certain period of time. And it's also important that you prioritize, right? You have to pay your bills, and it probably means you only got about 5 cents left in your pocket, but then you don't owe anybody. You don't have to worry about being evicted. You don't have to worry about your car being repossessed. You don't have to worry about someone taking something from you because you've earned your funding. You know how to allocate it and ensure that it's being spent fiscally responsible. So it's always an opportunity to think about the way you're thinking. Remember, when we talk about mental health, it's the way you think and understanding some of those things. So it's a true intersection to ensure that people have the right background and foundation. I think sometimes are not teaching those core skills to help people maintain stability. Even for an apartment, how much deposit do you have to have? If you're interested in owning your own home, well, you have to have good credit. Well, what does that look like? And how do I do that? And how can I maintain credit? And what resources are out there to teach me? But one of the things that I do caution you of, remember we talked a little bit about that compassion fatigue. And sometimes we try to take it all in, and we try to solve all of the world's problems because we see a person hurting and we want to help them because we know what that pain looks like. So just remember to kind of take a step back. Remember to always try to stay in your lane when you're trying to support someone and to help them connect the dots, rather you tell them what to do. You hear the saying, you can give someone fish or you can teach them how. And the goal is to empower individuals so that they can have that independence and live independently and to maintain their independence. And financial literacy is the heart of that, and ensuring that you know how to maintain a job, you know how to keep your account up to date, you know how to keep your credit score up to date, you know what it's like, even if you go to college, that you're not getting, it's been a while since I've been, but remember they had the table set up on the college campuses and they sold you into getting a t-shirt by filling out a credit card. Yeah, I did it, my bad. It wasn't a good idea, but I thought it was fun because I really just wanted a t-shirt. But teaching them that's probably not a good thing, because if you use the credit card, you gotta pay it back. How about that? But teaching them that financial literacy, but then also understanding that they can have the foundation to be successful and mentally stable.
How you doing?
Thank you. Next question.
Good afternoon.
Hold that thought. One second.
I think all this information is so incredibly valuable to not just mental health, but all types of health. I am an emergency physician. My name is Eli Gomez. I teach at Howard University. I've been doing emergency medicine for 20 years, and I can attest to the fact that a vast majority of what I see in the emergency room, whether it be trauma or manifestations of various diseases, is incredibly connected to the mental health state of that individual. And this is consistent over a 20-year career. There's maybe when one starts out in this type of endeavor, you say, well, there seems to be some kind of connection. No, now I can tell you, after 2 decades of doing this, there is a very direct connection. And the stressors and the allostatic load of being a black human being in the context of a racist society is an incredibly undervalued and understated. We cannot say it enough. The type of stress that's involved and the manifestations of that stress into our lives and our health state is incalculable. So what I want to share, which, and so many things have already been said, and I think this little piece maybe I can add, It's that we do not legitimize that stress and that injustice as having an impact, because we constantly, not just, which has already been mentioned, try to be too tough enough to handle it, but actually not acknowledge that it is real, that it is an injustice, and that we need to come up to one another and say to one another, no, what you're seeing is true. That is an entirely unfair stress on you. That is an incredibly disparate impact on our lives.
Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate that. Next
How
question.
you doing? Though you mentioned there's like 3% of black psychiatrists. I'm new and coming. I'm a psychiatrist in training, but
Snap.
Okay. All right. I just want to piggyback. So in my training, I'm based out in Jersey/New York. I want to just comment that cultural competency is big. I got into the field of psychiatry because of cultural competence. I worked in the prison system. I also lived in the environment that I practice in, for the most part. So I just want to implore you guys that even though you may not see minority men and women, also to note that some of our other counterparts have a little cultural competency. There are some colleagues that I trust. Not all of them, but there's a few. So I just also you may not see the black faces, but also to understand them to an extent, and also to give them a try. They may be better than what you think. And though we're only 3%, there's very few of me as well as the one on the podium right now, but just seek help. That's all I encourage. That's all I want to add.
And to Yaka's point earlier, y'all got to tell each other, when you find a good therapist that works for you or a good psychiatrist, spread the information. Even if you just start within your own family, own kind of wheelhouse of friends, just make sure you're spreading that communication. Any other questions? Right here. Okay.
Hi, I'm here from the Whitlow Foundation, and in my experience, I've worked in the capacity of child abuse prevention and childhood trauma. And to go to what you all were talking about earlier as far as the stigma, one thing that I think that continues to push the stigma and promote the stigma is unaddressed trauma and unaddressed trauma. So a lot of times I deal with a lot of teenagers, have visited a lot of families in home, do home visitations and all those things. And a lot of times what I see is that children being hushed when something is done to them or something has been previously done to them, which kind of leads to them being habitual liars or kind of telling tall tales or lies as really a cry out for help when they're really seeking help and they're really seeking nurturing, but don't know how to ask for it because something has happened to them and they don't know how to express it. I'm currently dealing with a client situation right now where she was referred to me. She's a college student, but she's been living out of her car since she was a high school senior. And she's going back to school, but she somehow missed her housing registration. So she wasn't able to go back to school when the semester started, so she has to wait till the next semester. So me trying to help her find housing, safe housing for her in DC for short term is really hard. She doesn't have a child, she's not on TANF, she doesn't have a lot of resources. So I connected her with transitional housing and made an arrangement where they were looking for a receptionist and she's looking for housing. So she would be their receptionist as her job, and in the form of payment, they would give her housing. So it hasn't even been a month, and she has already sabotaged that opportunity. She had some friends. Well, this all happened in one day. Her car got broken into, she got into a car accident, and she called somebody to fix her car, and they somehow stole her money. So we looked at me connecting with the resources around her that she has left, trying to provide wraparound resources for her to build a stronger community to actually help her and actually help herself internally. So we found out that her and her friends were trying to run a scheme. The breaking into her car was a scheme, which led to somebody stealing her money. So she's telling the story of, oh, my money got robbed because I called somebody to come fix my car on Craigslist. And in the time where I was trying to help myself or trying to pay this person, they stole the money from me. So she told me they stole $200. She told another person they stole $500, told another person they stole $400. So she's trying to get money from all of these people who care about her, and not only that, but trying to replace the items that were so-called stolen out of her car, when we found those items in her room.
So what do you think it would be the end game for her, for you primarily, so you don't end up with compassion fatigue, because it seems like you're trying to help somebody who continue to, whose bottom still ain't deep enough. So what do you think would be an end game of a couple word answers to making sure you're going to be okay while you're helping her?
Well, my end game would be to continue to communicate with her and continue to tell her to be honest with herself and to be honest with other people, but at the same time, check whatever you have going on internally. So my question is, what would you label that? Because a lot of resources around her, we had conversations and said maybe she's bipolar, maybe she is, but we really don't know. She saw a therapist, but didn't like the first day and never went back because he was a male and he was asking her too many hard questions.
Thank you. So we're going to let someone answer. And unfortunately, we're out of time because they have another event in this room. So we're going to let Dr. Hankerson say something really quickly and then wrap up.
There's no way that I or you or anybody else could diagnose her without, her being evaluated thoroughly by a professional. So that's what I would say.
Do you have anything to add, Inyaka? So we're gonna make ourselves available right after the panel ends. So can you guys give the panelists a round of applause, please? This panel actually kind of, again, thanking Congressman John Lewis's office. We weren't sure what the weather was going to do. I live in Atlanta. Several of us came from other cities, and so it kind of came together at the last minute. But we're so grateful that you guys came here today. Take one of these Silence to Shame cards. It lists our website. Please follow us on Instagram at Silence to Shame. On Facebook, we post a lot of helpful articles. We also have a podcast. We have 16 episodes up that may help and address a lot of issues that you talked about, excuse me, today. So consider joining the movement. Also, shameless plug, I wrote my new book, Silencing My Shame. So I have some for sale, cash or square. But we'll make ourselves available if you want to ask us some more questions afterwards.
October 10th is World Mental Health Day. So this is an opportunity for you to educate yourselves about mental health and wellness and keeping yourself safe and asking that question, how are you doing? Let's be intentional on that. Not just fine, but we're actually waiting for an answer to see how you're doing. So sometimes it's just as simple as that. October 10th, World Mental Health Day. Celebrate.
And if you want to get in contact with me, my number is 202-867-0956. If you're interested in getting 10 people together, we will come and show the film and offer promotional items and things like that and other resources. So that was me.
Oh, yeah, that was her.
Oh, it was the light.
Sorry for
because you
the
saw my youthful
snapping.
side. I ain't have my upper chin and stuff. Oh, okay.
Thank you guys very much. Remember to take time, save a life, and silence the shame.
Thank you.